Okay, so let me share with you two Air Force practices that are critical in times of crisis, that I've shared with several leadership teams where we collaborated, and over the last several months we focused on how to help them operate at a higher level or at the highest level possible as they manage through this time of global crisis. The first practice is called the talking out loud in the cockpit practice. And it sounds exactly what it is about. This is when we talk out loud in the cockpit, and it is a practice that's designed to harness what we know from brain science and evolutionary biology about the need to operate at the highest level. So we understand that there are three parts in the brain. There is the mid part of the brain, the limbic part, that is highly sensitized and highly attuned to the environment. And when you experience or get the signal of threat, the evolutionary biology circuitry is that the limbic system immediately engages the amygdala response, which is the flight, fight, freeze response. And guess what? Because if you're walking in the woods and there is a bear or a tiger, this indeed is the appropriate response. But what we now know about this response is that what it does is it brings that one threat into full focus to the exclusion of everything else, and it creates that myopic focus, which is why it is great for a scenario with a tiger in the woods, but is totally inappropriate and insufficient and actually suboptimal to a scenario when you're running a command center or a situation room where you're managing a crisis over time, perhaps a chronic crisis or something that you need to operate through several months, where you need to engage the analytical and the capacity to evaluate those other parts of the brain. And so what we find that by talking out loud, and actually talking a little slower even than the way I've spoken so far, we are able to bypass the prime circuitry that activates that fight, flight, freeze response to engage the analytical cerebral part of the brain by talking out loud. This is how I was trained. In the Air Force, you go into the cockpit and you'd say out loud everything you do and everything you see, and by engaging in this practice, you both bypass that other circuitry and you bypass the irrational part of the subconscious mind, because the speaking out loud practice engages also through listening and hearing your own voice, brings a complete and total focus to the analytical part of what it is you're looking at, and especially when the guidance, the brief of the practice is you must focus on the data. There is this segment which we often play in sessions from Apollo 13. They're in the back room with several of the engineers, and the lead character indicates and saying, you're telling me that we only have 45 hours and that's not going to get us to Earth. It's insufficient. And then there is a guy from the back, and at this point you hear all sorts of voices, but he steps forward and he says, hold on a minute, power is everything. And then he says the critical, game-changing sentence. He says, I've been looking at the data for the last hour. And then everything gets quiet for a moment. And he says, we must stop all the instrumentations and everything that we can stop, because we must preserve all the power that we can if we are to successfully bring them back to Earth. And there is a quiet moment, and the lead character again says, is that the deal? And yes, and there is a decision. And if you watch that segment, you can find this on YouTube, it's a 2-minute segment. It's the part that actually ends with this famous phrase, failure is not an option, where what you see mid through that segment, you see and observe and can feel the kind of focused and precise tone and focus on data as we need to speak in command centers and situation rooms. Which is why when you get into any of those places, you'll hear voices from various radios, but you will not hear screamings inside the room itself. Actually, the people in control, the people in command, you'll often hear them speak slowly and softly. And it's not just because they need to communicate confidence and sense of certainty and assurance and transmit that message and energy to the people on the receiving end. It's also because this is truly the best practice in order to step into this higher level functioning of evaluation and analysis to be able to guide the correct and the optimal decisions. So that is practice one, the talking out loud in the cockpit. And whether you run with your teams control tower type sessions, situation room type sessions, bringing that capacity that we look at the data in a neutral, impartial, impersonal way, we call it what it is, and then we evaluate options and plausible strategies that we can choose to implement. Then we make the decision and then we move on. So that's practice one. Practice two is again a practice that was drilled into me in the Air Force and really something that I've made part of my life and part of my family religion, so to speak, because we practice this every day of the week, which is we debrief what worked well and where did we fulfill and meet our expectations and where there were gaps between what we intended to do and where were we surprised and why, and what will we therefore do different next time. And this is a central element that we use in all of our strategy and leadership events, because to help teams operate at the highest level and produce the kind of breakthrough innovation and build that muscle in the organization where we are prepared to pivot from growth mindset, which was an important focus over the last couple of decades, but shift from growth mindset to learning mindset, where we lean even into greater flexibility and malleability, where we are prepared to forensically examine all the areas of our learning opportunities and we explore openly, where each person around the table can step into the hot seats and be coached and coach everybody else, and we build this community of learning and coaching. To do so, the core practice is debrief, truly examining, doing not just the post-mortem after something happened and looking few weeks and few months back. My encouragement and my collaboration with all the teams we're working with at the moment is we must use this time and engage, if possible, on a daily, on a weekly basis with debrief cycles to harvest critical learning and to then engage in the implementation and application of that learning. And I encourage that we each do this individually and collectively with our teams. And again, the practice is very simple. It's simply becoming very interested in what worked well and where there were gaps and what will we do different next time and how will we take that kind of an operation to an even higher level. So these are the two practices, the talking out loud in the cockpit and the debrief practice. And I encourage you to take these two practices and to bring them to life with your teams as you work to produce the highest level of performance in managing through this continual global crisis.